The tow truck notice taped to my windshield said I had until noon tomorrow, and it was already 9 at night. I moved to Omaha 3 years ago for a mailroom supervisor position at a corporate logistics office downtown. The kind of job where chaos means missed shipments and angry executives, and I had built a reputation for keeping things running smooth. I chose this neighborhood in West Omaha because the houses were newer, the HOA fees seemed reasonable, and the amenities looked nice in the brochure. What the brochure did not mention was that Millstone HOA board operated like a retirement club with enforcement teeth, and gossip traveled faster than the city snowplows. My driveway sat at the end of a cul-de-sac that caught the worst of the plow overflow, and last week the county contractor shoved a ridge of ice and frozen dirt onto my concrete apron, cracking the edge near the street. I planned to patch it myself once the weather warmed up enough for the repair compound to cure properly, maybe another week or 2 if the forecast held. Then Heather Walker, the pool and amenities chair who controlled Clubhouse access like a bouncer checking IDs, left a laminated violation notice on my door claiming the damage violated community standards and I owed $400 for immediate professional repair. The notice had blank spaces where she had filled in my address and the fine amount by hand in blue ballpoint pen, the same template I had seen taped to garage doors and mailboxes all winter. I called the management company that afternoon, and the receptionist put me through to a coordinator named Diane, who sounded tired before I even explained the situation. She listened while I walked her through the timeline, county plow, crack, my plan to fix it myself in 2 weeks. Then she said the board had passed an emergency winter maintenance rule in December that required all visible damage to be repaired within 72 hours regardless of weather, and the clock started when the violation was posted, not when I found out about it. I asked if that rule was in the CC&Rs, and she said it was a board resolution, not a covenant change, so it did not require a homeowner vote. I asked for a copy of the resolution, and she said she would email it. Then I asked about the $400 fine, and she paused. She said fines were set by the board during enforcement reviews, and if I wanted to dispute it, I needed to submit a written appeal within 5 business days. I said 5 days would put me past the 72-hour repair deadline, and she said I could request a delay, but the board was not required to grant it. I thanked her and hung up. The email with the resolution arrived 20 minutes later. It was a single-page PDF dated December 10th, signed by 3 board members including Heather, and it authorized the board to impose emergency repairs for safety violations, including cracked driveways, broken fences, and damaged siding. The language was vague enough to cover almost anything, and the definitions section listed visible damage as anything a reasonable person could see from the street. I read it twice, then checked the HOA website to see if the resolution had been posted in the member portal. It had not. I checked the November and December board meeting minutes, which were supposed to be public records under Nebraska law. The November minutes were blank, and the December minutes were marked draft with no approval date. I took screenshots of everything and saved them in a folder labeled HOA evidence. Then I went outside to take my own photos of the driveway crack before the light faded completely. The crack was maybe 8 inches long and 1/4 inch wide at the deepest point, the kind of thing that happens every winter in Nebraska when plows scrape curbs and freeze-thaw cycles do the rest. I took a dozen photos from different angles, then checked the county maintenance records online to confirm the plow schedule. The route map showed my street was plowed on January 14th at 6 in the morning, 2 days before Heather posted her notice. I downloaded the PDF and added it to my evidence folder. Then I called my buddy Mike, who worked in code enforcement for the city and owed me a favor after I helped him move last summer. He answered on the 3rd ring, and I could hear his kids yelling in the background. I explained the situation in under a minute, and he laughed. He said HOA emergency rules were not enforceable if they contradicted state law or created impossible timelines, and Nebraska had a statute requiring reasonable notice for repairs unless there was an immediate safety hazard. He said a driveway crack did not qualify as immediate unless it was deep enough to trip someone or damage a car, and from my description it sounded cosmetic. He told me to document everything, refuse to pay until I saw the actual board vote authorizing the fine, and file a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission if the HOA retaliated. I thanked him and said I owed him a beer. He said make it 2. The next morning I was loading my car for work when Heather appeared at the end of my driveway wearing her black parka and earmuffs, clipboard in hand. She did not say good morning. She said the 72-hour clock was now at 56 hours, and if I had not hired a contractor by tonight, she would escalate to the board for immediate action. I asked what immediate action meant, and she said the board could authorize emergency repairs at my expense and place a lien on my property if I refused to reimburse them. I asked if she had a copy of the board vote authorizing my specific fine, and she said the vote was in executive session and I was not entitled to see it. I said Nebraska open meeting laws required HOA boards to conduct business in open session unless they were discussing litigation or personnel, and fines did not fall under either exception. She stepped closer, and her voice dropped. She said, "I decide what the truth is around here, and if I wanted to play lawyer, I could take it up with the management company after my driveway was fixed." Then she turned and walked back toward her house, boots crunching through the snowpack. I sat in my car for a full minute, hands on the wheel, forcing myself to breathe slowly. The office opened at 8, and I needed to be there by 7:30 to prep the morning shipment sort. I started the engine and backed out carefully, avoiding the ice ridge at the curb. On the drive downtown, I replayed the conversation in my head, and one detail stuck: executive session. If the board was voting on individual fines in closed meetings, that was a problem. I made a mental note to check the state HOA statutes during lunch. At the office, I ran the mailroom crew through the morning sort, signed off on 3 rush deliveries, and ducked into the break room at 11 to pull up the Nebraska revised statutes on my phone. Chapter 21, the Nonprofit Corporation Act, covered HOA governance, and Section 21-19,107 was clear: boards could hold executive sessions only for specific reasons, and fines against homeowners were not on the list. I took a screenshot and added it to my folder. Then I texted Mike and asked if he knew any attorneys who handled HOA disputes. He replied 10 minutes later with a name: Laura Vance, a mediator who specialized in keeping neighborhood fights out of court. He said she was good at explaining what the HOA could and could not do without charging hourly rates that would bankrupt me. I called her office, got her voicemail, and left a message summarizing the situation in under 90 seconds. She called back during my lunch break. Laura had a calm, no-nonsense voice that reminded me of my high school counselor, someone who had seen every possible excuse and was not impressed by drama. She said HOAs loved emergency rules because they created the illusion of authority, but most of those rules fell apart under scrutiny if the homeowner pushed back properly. She asked 3 questions. Did I have photos of the damage? Did I have proof of when the plow came through? Did I have a copy of the resolution? I said yes to all 3. She said that put me ahead of 90% of the people who called her. Then she asked if the HOA had given me written notice before posting the violation, and I said no, Heather just taped it to my door. Laura said that was a procedural failure, and if the CC&Rs required advance notice, the fine was probably void. She told me to check my governing documents for notice requirements, then file a written appeal citing the missing notice and the impossible timeline. She said to keep it short, cite the specific covenant sections, and send it certified mail so the HOA could not claim they never received it. I asked what would happen if they ignored the appeal, and she said that was when I filed a complaint with the state or sued for declaratory relief. But it usually did not get that far, because most boards backed down once they realized the homeowner knew the rules. I thanked her and said I would send the appeal tonight. She said good luck and told me to call her if things escalated. I spent my lunch break in the car with the CC&Rs pulled up on my phone, scrolling through 60 pages of dense legal text until I found Article 7, Enforcement Procedures. Section 7.3 required written notice by certified mail at least 10 business days before any fine could be imposed, with exceptions only for health and safety emergencies as defined by city code. Section 7.4 required the board to hold a hearing if the homeowner requested one within 5 days of receiving notice. I had received no certified mail, no hearing offer, and the crack did not meet the city's definition of a safety emergency. I took more screenshots and started drafting the appeal in my notes app, keeping the tone polite but firm. I cited Section 7.3, attached my plow schedule proof and photos, and requested an immediate suspension of the fine pending a hearing. Then I saved the draft and went back inside to finish my shift. That night I printed the appeal on my home printer, signed it, and drove to the post office to send it certified mail with return receipt. The clerk handed me the green card and said it would be delivered in 2 to 3 business days. I asked if there was any way to make it faster, and she said I could pay for overnight, but the HOA office address was local, so regular certified would probably arrive tomorrow. I paid for regular and kept the receipt. On the way home, I stopped at the hardware store and bought a bag of cold patch asphalt compound, the kind that works down to 20 degrees, just in case I needed to make the repair myself to stop the clock. The cashier rang it up and asked if I was fixing a pothole, and I said something like that. When I got home, there was a new laminated notice taped to my front door. This one was a formal complaint log entry, case number W2025018, listing my address and the violation code for unsightly damage, with a handwritten note at the bottom, second notice. Repair deadline 1200 p.m. January 21. Failure to comply will result in emergency contractor dispatch at owner expense. The handwriting matched the first notice, same blue pen, same looping capitals. I peeled it off carefully and put it in a plastic sleeve, then added it to my evidence folder. The deadline was now 13 hours away, and I still had not heard back from the management company about my appeal. I checked my email. Nothing. I checked the member portal. The December resolution was still not posted, but there was a new announcement on the homepage: winter parking ban in effect. All vehicles must be parked in garages or designated guest spaces during snow events. Violators subject to towing at owner expense. The post was dated January 15th, the same day the plow came through, and there was no definition of what constituted a snow event or how long the ban lasted. I felt the anger building in my chest, the same tightness I got at work when someone tried to blame me for a shipping error that was not my fault. I forced myself to sit down at the kitchen table and think it through step by step. If I ignored the deadline and let them dispatch a contractor, I would be on the hook for whatever they charged, probably triple the fair rate, and I would have no leverage to fight it later. If I did the repair myself tonight, I would meet their deadline, but I would also validate their authority to impose the fine, and they would do it again the next time they wanted to squeeze money out of someone. The smart play was to wait for my appeal to go through and force them to follow their own rules. But the smart play assumed the HOA cared about rules, and everything I had seen so far said they did not. I opened my phone and called Laura Vance again. She picked up on the second ring, and I could hear classical music playing softly in the background. I told her about the second notice and the midnight deadline, and she asked if I had sent the appeal yet. I said yes, certified mail, it would arrive tomorrow. She was quiet for a moment, then said the HOA was trying to manufacture a default by moving faster than the postal system, a tactic she had seen before. She said if they dispatched a contractor before my appeal was delivered, that was a violation of the notice requirement and I could sue for the cost plus attorney fees. She said the question was whether I wanted to risk it. I asked what she meant, and she said if the contractor showed up and did the work, I would have to fight to get reimbursed, and that could take months. If I did the work myself tonight, I avoided the contractor, but I gave up my procedural argument. She said it was my call, but either way I needed to document everything: photos before and after, receipts, timestamps, witnesses if possible. I thanked her and said I would think about it. I sat at the table for another 10 minutes, staring at the laminated notice. Then I grabbed my coat and went outside with the cold patch compound and a trowel. The temperature was sitting right at 22 degrees, just above the product's minimum rating, and the driveway crack was dry enough to fill. I cleaned out the loose debris with a screwdriver, poured the compound into the gap, and packed it down with the trowel, working fast because my fingers were going numb even through the gloves. The whole job took maybe 15 minutes. When I finished, I took more photos with my phone, timestamped and geotagged, then went back inside and uploaded them to my evidence folder. I did not feel good about it. I felt like I had just lost the first round. The next day at work, I checked my email every hour, waiting for the certified mail confirmation. It came through at 2 in the afternoon, delivery confirmation, signed by someone named D. Ramos at the management company office. I forwarded the receipt to Laura and asked what happened next. She replied within minutes, wait. If they try to fine you again or escalate, that is when you file the state complaint. For now, you are on record with a valid appeal and proof of delivery. I saved her email and went back to sorting packages. 3 days later, I got a call from an unknown local number. I answered, and a man with a flat Midwestern accent said he was Todd from Premier Property Services, and he had been authorized by Millstone HOA to perform emergency concrete repair at my address. I said I had already repaired the damage myself, and he said that was not in his work order. I asked who authorized the work order, and he said the management company sent it over yesterday with my address and a description: driveway apron damage, emergency repair required. I said I had filed an appeal and the repair was already done, and he should contact the management company to cancel the order. He said he would call them, but if the work order was not canceled by tomorrow, he was required to show up and complete the job or charge a trip fee. I asked how much the trip fee was, and he said $250. I said that was insane, and he said take it up with the HOA. Then he hung up. I called the management company immediately and asked for Diane. The receptionist said Diane was in a meeting and I said I would hold. She put me on hold for 6 minutes, then Diane picked up and said she only had a minute. I told her about Todd's call and the work order, and she said the board had authorized emergency repairs after reviewing my case file. I said I had already done the repair and submitted an appeal with photographic proof, and she said the appeal was still under review. I said the appeal should have stopped any enforcement action, and she said emergency repairs were exempt from the appeal process under the December resolution. I asked if she had actually read my appeal, and she said she forwarded it to the board and they would respond in writing. I said if Todd showed up I would refuse entry to my property, and she said that was my right, but the trip fee would still apply. I said the trip fee was retaliation for filing an appeal, and she said I could include that in my complaint if I wanted to escalate further. Then she said she really had to go and hung up. I stood in my front yard, phone in hand, snow melting into my hair, and realized I was dealing with people who had no intention of playing fair. The repair was done. The appeal was filed. The photos were time-stamped and backed up, and they were still coming after me. I gave her a small thank you, because she just handed me leverage. If they charged me for a trip fee after I had documented proof the repair was complete, that was textbook bad faith, and Laura could use it to show a pattern of harassment. I went back inside and started a new document, a timeline with every interaction, every notice, every call, every email, with dates and names. I saved it in the same folder as the screenshots and photos. Then I sent Laura a summary email with the new details and asked if I should file the state complaint now or wait for the next move. She replied an hour later, wait, let them make the mistake, document everything. If they charge the trip fee, we have them. That weekend, the weather turned. Saturday morning, the temperature dropped to 8 degrees, and by noon the wind chill was -5. I stayed inside and caught up on laundry, checking my phone every half hour for updates. Nothing from the management company. Nothing from Todd. Sunday, the temperature climbed back to 24, and I went out to check the mailbox. Inside was a plain white envelope with no return address, just my name and address printed on a laser printer. I opened it standing at the curb, and inside was a single sheet of paper, an invoice from Premier Property Services for $250, line item description, trip fee annos. Emergency repair cancellation, due upon receipt. The invoice was dated January 23rd, 2 days ago, and there was a handwritten note at the bottom, payment required within 10 days to avoid collections referral. I took a photo of the invoice, front and back, then walked back to the house and called Laura. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. I read her the invoice word for word, and she asked if Todd had actually shown up at my property. I said no, he called once and I told him the work was done, and he said he would contact the management company. She asked if I had any proof he canceled the work order, and I said no, just the phone call. She said that was fine, the invoice itself was proof enough. She explained that charging a cancellation fee for work that was never scheduled in writing was a violation of Nebraska consumer protection statutes, and if the HOA tried to collect it through a lien, that opened them up to a counterclaim. She said I should send a written response to both the management company and Premier Property Services, stating that no service was requested or performed, the fee was unauthorized, and any attempt to collect would be disputed. She dictated the exact language I should use, and I typed it into my notes app while she talked. Then she said to send it certified mail, same as the appeal, and keep all the receipts. I asked if this was enough to file the state complaint, and she said not yet, but we were close. She said the HOA was building a perfect case against themselves, and if I stayed calm and kept documenting, they would eventually cross the line into something the state could not ignore. I drafted the response that night, printed 2 copies, and mailed them certified on Monday morning before work. The receipts went into my evidence folder, which was now thick enough that I had to use a binder clip to keep it together. At the office, I told my assistant manager I might need to take a personal day later in the week for a legal issue, and he asked if everything was okay. I said HOA trouble, and he winced. He said his sister had fought her HOA in Lincoln for 2 years over a fence color and finally just painted it beige to make them go away. I said I was not ready to give up yet. He shrugged and said it was my funeral. Wednesday night, I got home to find a truck parked in my driveway, a white Ford F-250 with magnetic door signs that said Premier Property Services. A man in a reflective vest was standing on my front porch with a clipboard, and when he saw me pull up, he walked over and tapped on my window. I rolled it down, and he said he was Todd. We had talked on the phone last week. I said I remembered. He said the management company had reissued the work order that morning and told him to inspect the driveway and provide a repair estimate. I said the driveway was already repaired, and he said he still needed to inspect it to close out the ticket. I said fine, inspect it, and I got out of the car. He walked over to the apron, crouched down, and ran his gloved hand over the patch I had done. He pulled out his phone, took 2 photos, and made a note on his clipboard. Then he stood up and said the patch looked adequate, but it was not a professional repair, and the management company might require me to redo it with a licensed contractor. I asked why, and he said something about liability and warranty requirements. I said the CC&Rs did not require licensed contractors for owner-performed maintenance, and he said he was just telling me what the management company told him. Then he handed me a business card and said if I wanted a quote for a professional redo, he could have his crew out next week. I took the card, said I would think about it, and watched him drive away. I went inside and immediately emailed Laura with the update. She replied 15 minutes later, they are trying to create a paper trail that makes your repair look substandard so they can justify forcing you to pay for their contractor. Do not engage. Do not get a quote. If they send another work order, document it and add it to the file. I saved her email and opened my evidence folder. The timeline was now 11 pages long, single-spaced, and I had 23 photos, 4 PDFs, and 6 email threads. I printed everything and put it in a 3-ring binder with labeled tabs: notices, photos, correspondence, statutes, invoices. It looked like something I would see in a courtroom, and that was exactly the point. Thursday, I was halfway through the morning sort when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Heather Walker. Millstone HOA pool and amenities chair. Your appeal has been reviewed and denied. Original fine of $400 stands. Payment due by January 31. Failure to pay will result in a lien filing and additional penalties. Do not argue with me. Take it up with the board. I stared at the message for a full 10 seconds, then forwarded it to Laura with a single line. They denied the appeal by text message. Is that legal? She called me 2 minutes later. Laura said denial by text was not just unprofessional, it was probably not legally sufficient under the CC&Rs, which almost certainly required written notice for any board decision. She asked if the text included any reasoning or findings, and I read it back to her. She said that was even worse, because a valid denial had to state the specific grounds and explain why my evidence was rejected. She said this was escalating faster than she expected, and I needed to respond immediately with another written demand, request a formal hearing under Section 7.4, state that the text message did not constitute proper notice, and reiterate that the original fine violated the advance notice requirement. She said to send it certified again and copy the entire board, not just the management company. I asked how I got the board members' addresses, and she said they were required to be on file with the county clerk under the nonprofit registration. She told me to look up the HOA's corporate registration and get the names and addresses from there. I said I would do it tonight. She said good, and if the board ignored the hearing request, that was when I filed the state complaint and possibly sued. I asked how much that would cost, and she said the filing fee for a declaratory judgment action was around $200, and if I won I could recover attorney fees. I said I might represent myself to save money, and she said that was an option, but HOAs love to bury self-represented homeowners in procedural motions. She said think about it, and call her before I filed anything. I looked up the Millstone HOA corporate registration during my lunch break. The state database listed 3 board members: Heather Walker, President; Donald Fisk, Vice President; Sharon Yao, Secretary. Their addresses were all in the same neighborhood, within 4 blocks of my house. I wrote down the addresses, then drafted a new demand letter at my desk between sorting bins. I kept it short and formal. I hereby request a hearing under CC&R Article 7, Section 7.4, regarding case W2025018. The January 23 text message denial does not constitute proper written notice as required by governing documents. The original violation notice failed to provide advance certified mail notice as required by Section 7.3. I request an immediate hearing and suspension of all fines and penalties pending resolution. I printed 3 copies, signed them, and mailed them certified that afternoon. 1 to each board member. Friday morning, I woke up to my car windshield covered in a bright orange sticker, Parking Violation TOW Warning. Vehicle parked in violation of winter parking ban. Must be moved to garage or guest parking within 24 hours or subject to TOW at owner expense. Contact Millstone HOA Management Office with questions. The sticker was the size of a sheet of paper, stuck on so hard I had to scrape it off with my ice scraper, and it left a residue that smeared across the glass. I took photos of the sticker, the residue, and the car's position in my driveway before I scraped it clean. Then, I checked the HOA announcement again. The winter parking ban said vehicles had to be parked in garages or guest spaces during snow events. But it did not define snow events, and it did not say anything about private driveways. My car was in my own driveway, on my own property, not on the street. I called the management company and got Diane's voicemail. I left a message. This is case W225018 again. I just found a tow warning on my car, which is parked in my private driveway, not on the street. The parking ban does not apply to private driveways. Please confirm this sticker was placed in error and cancel any tow orders. I am documenting all of this for my state complaint. Then I hung up and forwarded the photos to Laura. She called me back during my afternoon break. She said the tow warning was harassment, plain and simple, and if they actually towed my car from my own driveway, I could sue for conversion and probably win damages. She said the problem was that towing companies did not care about the legal details. They just followed the work order, and if the HOA issued a tow order, the truck would show up and hook my car before I could stop it. She said I needed to contact the towing company directly and tell them the vehicle was on private property and any tow would be disputed. I asked how I found out which towing company the HOA used, and she said it was probably listed in the CC&Rs under enforcement procedures or posted on the community bulletin board. I said I would check tonight. She said if I could not find it, park the car in a guest space for now to avoid the fight, then deal with the harassment angle later. I said I did not want to give them the satisfaction, and she said I understood that, but sometimes you had to pick your battles. I said I would think about it. That night I parked my car in front of my garage, angled so it was clearly on my property and not touching the street, and I put a handwritten note on the dashboard, vehicle on private property. Any tow will be prosecuted. Then I checked the CC&Rs for the towing company name. Article 9, Section 9.2 listed enforcement contractors, and the towing company was Midlands Auto Recovery with a local phone number. I called them and got a recording, office hours Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. I left a voicemail explaining that I was a homeowner at Millstone, my car was parked on my private driveway, and any tow order issued by the HOA was unauthorized. I gave my address and phone number and asked them to call me before dispatching a truck. Then I went to bed and set my alarm an hour early so I could move the car to a guest space before work if I had to. Saturday morning I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Heather, "Your car is still in violation. Final warning. Tow ordered for 12:00 p.m. today unless moved to guest parking immediately." I looked at the clock, 8:15. I had less than 4 hours. I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and went outside. My car was still in the driveway, no tow truck in sight, but there was a new laminated notice zip-tied to my mailbox post, "Final TOW Warning." Case W2025018. I ripped it off, took a photo, and drove to the nearest guest parking area, a cluster of spaces near the clubhouse. Every space was full. I circled back to the next guest lot, same thing. The third lot had one open space, and I pulled in, locked the car, and walked the 6 blocks back to my house through snow that was starting to fall again. By the time I got home, my boots were soaked and my toes were numb. I changed into dry socks and made coffee, then sat down at the kitchen table with my binder and started adding the new notices and texts to the timeline. The pattern was obvious now. Every time I pushed back, Heather escalated with a new rule or a new fee, and the management company backed her up without question. The evidence was piling up, but I still did not have the one thing I needed to make the board stop: proof that the whole system was rigged. I thought about the invoices, the work orders, the trip fees. Something about the numbers felt wrong. I opened my laptop and pulled up the HOA ledger from the member portal, which showed a summary of community expenses by month. December listed a line item for legal fees, $4,200, and January showed another $3,800. I opened the CC&Rs and checked the budget section. Legal fees were capped at $5,000 per year unless the board held a special assessment vote. 2 months, $8,000, no special assessment notice. I took a screenshot and sent it to Laura with a subject line, "Found something." She called me 10 minutes later and said this was exactly what she was hoping I would find. She explained that HOAs often padded legal fees by billing for work that was never done, or charging homeowners for advice that benefited the board personally, and if the fees exceeded the budget cap without a vote, that was a breach of fiduciary duty. She said I needed to request copies of the actual invoices, not just the ledger summary, and compare them to the management company's contract to see if the fees were real. I asked how I got the invoices, and she said Nebraska law gave homeowners the right to inspect financial records with reasonable notice, usually 10 business days. She said to send a written request to the management company and the board citing Nebraska Revised Statutes Section 21-19,174, which governed non-profit financial transparency. I drafted the request that afternoon and sent it certified mail to all 3 board members and the management company, copying Laura. The language was simple. I request copies of all legal invoices paid by Millstone HOA in December 2024 and January 2025 as permitted under NRS 21-19,174. Please provide these records within 10 business days. Monday morning I was back at work when Diane called. She sounded annoyed. She said my records request was received and the board would respond within the statutory timeframe, but she wanted to clarify that financial records were confidential and I was only entitled to see aggregate numbers, not itemized invoices. I said the statute did not make that distinction, and she said the board's attorney disagreed. I asked for the attorney's name and contact information, and she said that was privileged. I said I would wait for the written response, and she said fine. Then she said the board was also concerned about my pattern of confrontational behavior and was considering additional enforcement action if I continued to disrupt community operations. I asked what confrontational behavior meant, and she said filing repetitive appeals, contacting vendors directly, and making unfounded accusations about financial mismanagement. I said everything I had filed was supported by evidence and allowed under the governing documents, and she said the board would make that determination. Then she hung up. I called Laura and replayed the conversation. She said the confrontational behavior line was a setup, and the board was probably drafting a harassment complaint to justify fining me for something unrelated to the driveway. She said they were panicking because I had requested the invoices, and they were trying to intimidate me into dropping it. She said do not drop it. I said I was not planning to. She said good, and if the board refused to provide the invoices within 10 days, I would file a state complaint for financial transparency violations and copy the Real Estate Commission, the Attorney General, and the county clerk. I said that sounded nuclear, and she said it was, but HOAs only changed when they faced public accountability. That weekend I stayed home and waited. No calls, no emails, no new notices. Sunday afternoon I walked to the guest lot to check on my car, and it was fine, covered in 2 inches of fresh snow but otherwise untouched. I brushed it off and drove it back to my driveway, parking it in the exact same spot as before. If they wanted to tow it, they would have to come through me first. Monday morning I got up early and checked the driveway from my bedroom window. The car was still there. I went to work, came home, checked again. Still there. Tuesday, same thing. By Wednesday I was starting to relax, which was a mistake. Thursday morning I woke up to a voicemail from Midlands Auto Recovery, time-stamped 6:45 a.m. This message is for the owner of the vehicle at 4782 Dewey Court. We have a tow order from Millstone HOA for parking violation. Our truck will arrive at your location at 800 a.m. If you want to avoid the tow, move your vehicle immediately. If you have questions, contact the HOA. I checked the clock, 7:20. I had 40 minutes. I pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed my coat and keys, and ran outside. My car was still in the driveway, no tow truck yet, but there was a new laminated notice zip-tied to the mailbox, TOW, authorized, case W 2025-018. I ripped it off, shoved it in my pocket, and got in the car. I started the engine and backed out onto the street, then sat there with the heater running, trying to decide where to go. The guest lots were full again. I could park on the street, but the winter ban said street parking was prohibited during snow events, and we had gotten 3 inches overnight. I could drive to work early and deal with it later, but that felt like running. I pulled out my phone and called Laura. She did not answer. I tried again. Voicemail. I left a message they ordered a tow for 8 a.m. I moved the car, but I do not know where to put it. Call me back. Then I sat in the idling car and watched the clock tick down. 7:35. 7:40. 7:45. At 7:50, a flatbed tow truck turned onto my street, slow and deliberate, orange lights flashing. I put the car in gear and drove to the clubhouse, parking in the fire lane right in front of the main entrance where the no parking curb was painted red. If they wanted to tow me, they could explain to the fire marshal why they blocked emergency access. The tow truck circled my street twice, then stopped in front of my house. I watched from the clubhouse parking lot, phone in hand, recording video. The driver got out, walked up my driveway, looked around, then got back in the truck and drove away. I stopped recording and saved the video. Then I called the towing company and asked to speak to the dispatcher. A woman answered, and I said I was the homeowner at 4782 Dewey Court. I had just watched your truck leave, and I wanted to confirm the tow order was canceled. She put me on hold for a minute, then came back and said the driver reported the vehicle was not on site, so the order was marked incomplete. I asked if incomplete meant canceled, and she said no, it meant the truck would return if the HOA reissued the order. I said the vehicle was parked on private property when the order was issued, and any future tow would be disputed. She said I needed to take that up with the HOA, and she hung up. I sat in the car for another 10 minutes watching the clubhouse entrance. No one came out. No one went in. The building looked dark and empty, snow piling up on the steps. I took a photo of my car in the fire lane, time-stamped, then drove to work. I was 20 minutes late, and my assistant manager gave me a look but did not say anything. I clocked in, ran the morning sort, and spent my lunch break drafting another email to the board. I kept it clinical. Vehicle was parked on private property at time of tow order. Tow order violated property rights and CC&R provisions. Request immediate written confirmation that no further tow orders will be issued. I sent it to all 3 board members, copied Laura and the management company, and attached the video of the tow truck. Then I went back to work and tried to focus on shipping labels. That night Laura called and said she had reviewed the video and the emails, and it was time to file the state complaint. She said I had enough evidence to show a pattern of procedural violations, financial mismanagement, and harassment, and the Real Estate Commission took those complaints seriously. She said the complaint would trigger an investigation, and the board would have to respond in writing with copies of all the documents I had requested. She said it would not be fast, probably 60 to 90 days, but it would put pressure on the board and the management company to settle. I asked what settling would look like, and she said probably a written agreement to drop the fines, correct the procedural violations, and maybe reimburse me for the repair costs. I asked if I would get an apology, and she laughed. She said HOAs never apologized, but sometimes they stopped acting like tyrants for a few months, and that was the best I could hope for. I said I would take it, I filed the state complaint online that night, using the Real Estate Commission's homeowner dispute portal. The form asked for a summary of the issue, and I kept it to 3 paragraphs. Procedural failures, unauthorized fees, harassment, and retaliation. I uploaded my entire evidence folder as attachments: the binder scans, the photos, the emails, the invoices, the statutes, everything. The confirmation page said my complaint number was 2025 RC0487 and I would receive a response within 15 business days. I printed the confirmation and added it to the binder. Then I poured a bourbon, sat on the couch, and let myself feel a little bit of relief. I had done everything right. I had followed the rules. I had built the case. Now I just had to wait. Except the board was not interested in waiting. Saturday morning, I got an email from Diane with the subject line, Emergency Board Meeting Notice. The body was short. The Millstone HOA board will hold an emergency meeting on January 27 at 6:00 p.m. at the Clubhouse to address ongoing compliance issues related to case W2025-018. Your attendance is required. Failure to attend may result in additional penalties. I read it 3 times, then checked the date. January 27th was Monday, 2 days away. I called Laura and read her the email. She said emergency meetings were allowed under most CC&Rs, but only for true emergencies like natural disasters or safety threats, and a driveway repair dispute did not qualify. She said the board was trying to rush a decision before the state complaint investigation started, and I should absolutely attend the meeting and record everything. She said to bring my binder, stay calm, and let them do the talking. She said if they tried to impose new fines or penalties without giving me a chance to speak, that was another procedural violation I could add to the complaint. I asked if she could come with me, and she said she was not an attorney so she could not represent me, but she could attend as a witness and take notes. I said that would help. She said she would meet me at the Clubhouse at 5:45. Monday afternoon, I left work early and stopped at the office supply store to print extra copies of my evidence folder, 1 for each board member. The clerk asked if I was preparing for a trial, and I said close enough. I paid for the copies, drove home, and changed into clean clothes, khakis, a button-down shirt, my navy parka. I wanted to look calm and reasonable, not like someone who had spent 2 weeks building a case to destroy the HOA. I grabbed the binder and the extra copies, locked the house, and walked to the Clubhouse. The snow had stopped, but the temperature was dropping fast, and my breath hung in the air like smoke. Laura was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her car in a long gray coat and a red scarf. She waved when she saw me, and we walked to the entrance together. The Clubhouse was a low brick building with a peaked roof and narrow windows, the kind of place that looked nice in the summer but grim in the winter. Inside, the lights were on, and I could hear voices coming from the meeting room. We walked in, and the room went quiet. The board sat at a folding table in the front, Heather in the middle with Donald and Sharon on either side. Heather looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that did not reach her eyes. She said, "Thank you for coming." We were just about to start. There were maybe a dozen other people in the room, all older, all sitting in folding chairs facing the board. I recognized a few faces from the neighborhood, but no one made eye contact. Laura and I sat in the back row, and I set the binder on my lap. Heather stood up and cleared her throat. She said, "This emergency meeting has been called to address a pattern of non-compliance and disruptive behavior by a homeowner in case W2025-018. The board has reviewed the evidence and determined that the homeowner has failed to meet community standards, ignored multiple notices, and interfered with HOA contractors. Tonight we will vote on additional penalties and possible legal action." She looked directly at me. She said, "You will have an opportunity to speak after the board presents its findings. Do not argue with me. Take it up with the board." Donald spoke next, reading from a printed sheet. He said the board had received multiple complaints about my property, including the driveway damage, unauthorized parking, and confrontational communication with vendors and staff. He said the December emergency resolution gave the board authority to act quickly on violations that threatened community aesthetics and safety, and my refusal to cooperate had forced them to take stronger measures. He said the original $400 fine was still due, plus an additional $200 for the trip fee. plus a new $300 fine for parking violations. Total $900 due by February 5th. If I failed to pay, the board would file a lien and refer the case to collections. He set the paper down and looked at me. He said, "Do you have anything to say?" I stood up slowly, holding the binder. I said yes. I filed an appeal on January 18th, which suspended all enforcement under Section 7.4 of the CC&Rs. I requested a hearing, which you denied by text message without providing any findings or allowing me to present evidence. I repaired the driveway myself on January 17th, before your 72-hour deadline, and I have photos proving the work was completed. The trip fee invoice was issued for work that was never performed and was never authorized by me. The tow warning was placed on my car while it was parked on my private property, which is not subject to the winter parking ban. And the legal fees you just mentioned exceed the annual budget cap without a special assessment vote, which violates your fiduciary duty under state law. I walked to the front of the room and set the 3 extra binder copies on the table, one in front of each board member. I said everything I just said is documented in here, with photos, receipts, statutes, and your own notices. I also filed a complaint with the State Real Estate Commission on January 24th, and they are investigating all of this. So before you vote on anything, I suggest you read the evidence. The room was dead silent. Sharon opened her binder and started flipping through the tabs, her face going pale. Donald stared at his copy without touching it. Heather's smile disappeared. She said, "This is not how we do things here. You do not get to walk in and accuse the board of wrongdoing without proof." I said, "The proof is in the binder." She said, "Your so-called proof does not count. The board has determined that your evidence does not meet our winter documentation standards, and until you provide properly formatted records, your appeal is still denied." I asked what winter documentation standards meant, and she said all evidence submitted during winter months had to be notarized and filed on the official HOA appeal form, which was available at the management office for a $15 processing fee. Laura stood up and said, "That is not in the CC&Rs, and you cannot invent new requirements to avoid accountability." Heather turned to her and said, "Who are you?" Laura said, "I am a legal observer, and everything said here tonight is being documented." Heather said, "This is a closed meeting for homeowners only. You need to leave." Laura said, "Nebraska open meeting laws apply to HOA boards, and this meeting was noticed as open to the community. If you want to close it, you need a valid reason under the statute." Heather looked at Donald, and Donald looked at Sharon. No one said anything. I sat down and let the silence stretch. Finally, Sharon said, "Maybe we should table this and review the materials before we vote." Heather said, "We are not tabling anything. We have a quorum and a clear violation. We vote tonight." Donald said, "I think Sharon is right. This is more complicated than we thought." Heather stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She said, "Fine. We will table the vote. But the fines stand until we meet again, and if you do not pay by February 5th, we are filing the lien." She looked at me. She said, "Do not think you won anything tonight. This is not over." She walked out, and Donald and Sharon followed. The other homeowners stood up slowly, whispering to each other, and filed out into the cold. Laura and I stayed in our seats until the room was empty. Then she said, "That went better than I expected." I said, "They tabled the vote but kept the fines." "How is that better?" She said, "Because now they are on record refusing to consider your evidence, and when the state investigates, they will have to explain why." She said the winter documentation standards line was gold because it showed the board was making up rules on the spot to block legitimate appeals. I asked what happened next, and she said I waited for the 10-day deadline on the invoice request, and if they did not provide the records, I escalated the state complaint to include financial transparency violations. I said, "And if they file the lien?" She said, "Then we sue, and we win. Because they have no legal basis for the fines and the lien will get dismissed." I said that sounded expensive, and she said it was. But the alternative was paying $900 for violations I did not commit and letting the board do it to the next person. I said I would think about it. I walked home in the dark, snow crunching under my boots, and when I got to my driveway I saw another laminated notice zip-tied to the mailbox. I pulled it off and read it under the porch light. Lien notice. Case W 2025-018. Outstanding balance $900 due February 5. Failure to pay will result in lien filing with county clerk and collections referral. The notice was dated today, January 27th, the same day as the meeting. They had prepared it before I even walked into the room. I took a photo and went inside. The weekend passed in a blur of checking my phone and refreshing my email. No response from the board. No invoice copies. No follow-up from the management company. Monday morning, I woke up to an email from Diane. The board has reviewed your records request and determined that itemized legal invoices are attorney-client privileged and exempt from disclosure under Nebraska law. You may review aggregate financial summaries during regular office hours with 48 hours advance notice. If you wish to proceed, please contact our office to schedule an appointment. I forwarded the email to Laura with a single word. Thoughts? She called me 5 minutes later. She said the attorney-client privilege argument was garbage because the invoices I requested were payment records, not legal advice, and payment records were not privileged. She said the board was stalling, and I needed to escalate the state complaint immediately to force their hand. She walked me through the process, log into the complaint portal, click Update Complaint, attach the new email, and add a summary of the refusal to provide records. I did it while she stayed on the line, typing fast. When I hit Submit, she said, "Good. Now we wait for the commission to respond, and in the meantime, you do not pay anything, you do not sign anything, and you do not let them onto your property without a court order." I said, "What if they file the lien?" She said, "Let them." A fraudulent lien is a cloud on your title, and you can sue to remove it and recover damages. I said that sounded like a lot of work, and she said it was, but the alternative was worse. Tuesday night, I got a text from a neighbor I barely knew. An older man named Gene, who lived 3 doors down, saw the meeting notes. Board is talking about filing liens against multiple people. Thought you should know. I texted back, "Thanks. Do you know who else?" He replied, "At least 2 others. Same thing, bogus fines and emergency repairs. They are targeting people who push back." I asked if he would be willing to talk to Laura, and he said maybe, but he did not want his name on anything official. I said I understood and thanked him again. Then I forwarded the texts to Laura and asked if multiple complaints strengthened my case. She said absolutely, and if I could get the other homeowners to file their own state complaints, it would show a pattern and trigger a broader investigation. I asked how I found out who the other homeowners were, and she said talk to Gene and see if he would introduce me. Wednesday, I knocked on Gene's door after work. He answered in a cardigan and slippers, holding a coffee mug, and invited me inside. His living room was warm and cluttered, bookshelves stuffed with paperbacks and old DVDs, a space heater running in the corner. He offered me coffee, and I said no thanks. We sat down, and he said he had gotten a violation notice 2 months ago for a mailbox that was supposedly leaning, even though it looked fine to him. The notice said he had to replace it with an HOA-approved model within 10 days, or pay a $200 fine. He replaced it himself with a new post, but the board said the new mailbox was the wrong shade of black and fined him anyway. He paid the fine because he did not want trouble, but then last month they fined him again for snow removal delays, claiming his driveway was not cleared within 24 hours of a snowfall. He said he had cleared it the same day, but Heather said the photos she took showed ice patches, so the fine stood. He paid that one too. Now he was on their radar, and he was waiting for the next notice. I asked if he had kept any of the notices or taken any photos, and he said he threw most of it away because he did not think it mattered. I said it mattered, and if he filed a state complaint with even partial documentation, it would help my case and maybe get his money back. He said he did not want to make waves, and I said the waves were already here. He thought about it for a minute, then said he would talk to the other homeowner, a woman named Rita who lived on the next street over, and see if she was interested. I gave him Laura's contact information and said she could walk them through the process. He said he would think about it, and I left it at that. Thursday, I was at my desk when Diane called. She said the board had decided to move forward with the lien filing unless I paid the outstanding balance by end of business Friday. I said I was not paying anything until my appeal was resolved and the invoices were provided, and she said the appeal was denied and the invoice request was closed. I said the State Real Estate Commission disagreed, and she said the commission had no authority over internal HOA decisions. I said we would see about that, and I hung up. Then I called Laura and told her they were filing the lien tomorrow. She said, let them. Once the lien is filed, we add it to the state complaint and we file a civil suit for slander of title. I said, how much is this going to cost me? She said, the filing fee is $200, and if you represent yourself, the only other cost is time. If you hire an attorney, it is more, but you can recover fees if you win. I said I would represent myself. She said, okay. I will help you draft the complaint tonight and we will file it Monday. Friday morning, I checked the county clerk's website and saw the lien, Millstone HOA Visa's owner of 4782 Dewey Court, amount $900 plus interest and fees, filed January 31st. I took a screenshot and sent it to Laura. She replied, perfect. Now we have everything we need. I spent my lunch break drafting the civil complaint using a template Laura sent me, filling in the blanks with dates and amounts and statute citations. It felt like building a shipping manifest, every line item backed up by a document, every claim tied to a fact. I saved the draft and sent it to Laura for review. She called me an hour later and said it looked good, but I needed to add one more claim, abuse of process. She said the board had used emergency procedures and lien threats to punish me for exercising my legal rights, and that was a tort. I added the claim and saved the file again. That weekend, I stayed home and worked on the complaint, refining the language, checking the citations, making sure every paragraph was clear and factual. Saturday night, I printed the final version, signed it, and put it in a folder with all the exhibits. Sunday, I drove to the courthouse and confirmed the filing process. I needed to file the original with the clerk, serve copies on the defendants, and pay the filing fee. I could serve the board members by certified mail, same as before. I made a checklist and set it aside for Monday. Monday morning, I filed the complaint at the Douglas County District Court. The clerk stamped the original, gave me a case number, and handed me the filing receipt. I paid the $200 fee and walked out with copies for service. Then I drove to the post office and sent certified copies to all 3 board members and the management company, return receipt requested. The whole process took less than an hour, and when I got to work, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I had done everything I could do. Now it was up to the court and the state. Tuesday, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a man said, "This is Jeffrey Brennan, attorney for Millstone HOA. I understand you filed a lawsuit against my clients." I said that was correct. He said he had reviewed the complaint and it was full of misstatements and procedural errors, and he was prepared to file a motion to dismiss. I said I was confident in my facts and I looked forward to his motion. He said, "You are representing yourself?" I said yes. He said, "That is a mistake. HOA litigation is complex and you are going to lose." I said, "We will see." He said, "I am offering you a settlement. Drop the lawsuit, pay $500 to cover the driveway repair and administrative costs, and we will release the lien and close the case." I said no. He said, "This is your only chance. After I file the motion, the offer is off the table." I said, "File your motion." Then I hung up. I called Laura and told her about the settlement offer. She said $500 was less than the $900 they were demanding, which meant they were nervous. She said the motion to dismiss would probably argue that I had not exhausted the HOA's internal appeals process, but that argument would fail because the board had denied my appeal improperly and refused to provide the hearing I requested. She said to let Brennan file his motion, respond with the facts, and wait for the judge to rule. I asked how long that would take, and she said probably 60 days. I said, "What do I do in the meantime?" She said, "Nothing. Do not contact the board. Do not pay anything. Do not let them provoke you. Just wait." Waiting was harder than fighting. I went to work, came home, checked my email, checked the court docket, checked the state complaint portal. No updates. No motion. No response from the Real Estate Commission. A week passed. Then 2. Then, on February 10th, I got an email from the state. Your complaint 2025-RC0487 has been assigned to an investigator. The HOA and management company will be required to respond within 30 days. You will receive a copy of their response and an opportunity to reply. Thank you for your patience. I forwarded it to Laura, and she replied with a thumbs-up emoji. 2 days later, the motion to dismiss arrived by certified mail. It was 8 pages long, single-spaced, and it argued that I had failed to exhaust internal remedies, that my claims were barred by the business judgment rule, and that the court lacked jurisdiction over internal HOA governance. I read it twice, then sent it to Laura. She called me that night and said it was a standard defense motion, and most of the arguments were weak. She said I had 10 days to file a response, and she would help me draft it. We spent an hour on the phone going through the motion paragraph by paragraph, and she dictated the counter-arguments while I typed. The response ended up being 6 pages, and it cited the CC&Rs, the state statutes, and 3 Nebraska appellate cases that supported my position. I filed it on February 20th, certified copies to Brennan and the court, and waited again. March came in cold and gray. The snow started to melt, then froze again, then melted again, turning the neighborhood into a mess of slush and ice. I kept my car in the driveway, and no one bothered me. No new notices, no new texts, no calls from Diane. It felt like a ceasefire, but I did not trust it. I kept checking the court docket, and on March 5th, the judge issued an order denying the motion to dismiss. The order was short. Defendant's motion is denied. Plaintiff has alleged sufficient facts to state a claim. Case will proceed to discovery. I printed the order and added it to the binder, which was now 2 inches thick. The next day I got an email from Brennan. In light of the court's ruling, my clients are prepared to settle. They will drop all fines and release the lien in exchange for your agreement to drop the lawsuit and the state complaint. No payment required. I called Laura and read her the email. She said, "They are caving." I said, "Should I take it?" She said, "That depends. Do you want your money back, or do you want to make sure they do not do this to someone else?" I said both. She said, "Then do not settle yet. Wait for the state investigation to finish, because if the commission finds violations, the board will face penalties and the management company might lose its license. That is the accountability piece. Once that is done, you can settle the lawsuit and get your costs reimbursed." I said, "How long will the state investigation take?" She said, "Could be 3 months, could be 6. I said, "I can wait." I replied to Brennan, "I will consider settlement after the state investigation concludes. In the meantime, I expect full compliance with discovery requests." He did not reply. I sent my first set of discovery requests the next week, interrogatories asking for the names of everyone involved in my case, document requests for all board meeting minutes and financial records from December and January, and requests for admission asking the board to admit they had not followed the CC&Rs. The pedid mayan rive the court listed the bird bath insurrection, the cabs at also be trying but soozing out that around town. The pestin board where you missed a dost to quit toy when situate churzer. More the orla toys, and as long line to became McConglum. I needed mass attraction, and soozing on best of a corni from a gaving a 10-6 day introfection. Nilifying Sraxon had tour neopost defied the park and arrive and my folly be distracted from the Connery situation, and to do stand in there bland. Brennan had 30 days to respond. April arrived with warmer weather and the first signs of green pushing through the snowmelt. I patched the driveway crack again, this time with proper concrete filler, and it looked better than the cold patch job. No one said anything. I started parking on the street because the winter ban had quietly disappeared from the website, and I wanted to test whether they would enforce it. No tow warnings. No notices. It was like the whole fight had evaporated, except for the lawsuit and the state investigation still grinding forward in the background. On April 18th, I got a thick envelope from Brennan's office, the discovery responses. The interrogatories were mostly evasive, but one answer caught my eye. Question 12 asked who had authorized the legal fees in December and January, and the answer was the board authorized payments to counsel for services rendered in connection with enforcement actions and general corporate advice. The invoices were attached as Exhibit C. I flipped to Exhibit C, and there they were, 12 invoices from Brennan's firm, dated between December 1st and January 31st, totaling $8,200. I scanned through the line items, and most of them were vague. Legal research, 4 hours. Client communication, 2 hours. Document review, 3 hours. But 3 invoices had a specific description. Enforcement action re. 4782 Dewey Court. The dates matched my case timeline exactly. I added up those 3 invoices, $2,400. I called Laura and read her the numbers. She said, "They billed the HOA $2,400 to fight your $400 fine." "That is insane." I said, "Is it illegal?" She said, "Not illegal, but it is a breach of fiduciary duty if the board approved those fees without disclosing the costs to the homeowners." She said the real smoking gun would be if the invoices showed Brennan was advising the board on how to avoid the CC&R notice requirements, because that would be evidence of intentional misconduct. I said, "How do I prove that?" She said, "You do not. The state investigator does. But you can highlight the invoices in your response to the state and let them connect the dots." I updated my state complaint that night, attaching the invoice exhibits and adding a new section. The management company approved legal fees totaling $8,200 without homeowner notice or vote, exceeding the annual budget cap by 64%. 3 invoices totaling $2,400 were specifically related to enforcement actions against my property, suggesting the board used community funds to pursue a personal vendetta. I hit submit and saved the confirmation. May came, and with it the real bombshell. I got a call from the State Real Estate Commission investigator, a woman named Sandra, who said she had reviewed my complaint and the HOA's response, and she needed to ask me a few follow-up questions. I said I was happy to help. She asked if I had any evidence that the management company had backdated notices or altered records, and I said I did not have direct proof, but the timeline was suspicious. She said, "Suspicious how?" I walked her through it. The December resolution was dated the 10th but never posted to the member portal. The meeting minutes were marked draft with no approval date, and the violation notice I received was dated January 16th, but the 72-hour clock supposedly started on the 14th. She said, "So you think they backdated the resolution to make it look like it was in effect before your violation?" I said, "That is what it looks like to me." She said, "Interesting." She said the management company's response claimed all procedures were followed correctly and all notices were sent on time, but they had not provided any proof of mailing dates or board vote records. She said that was a red flag, and she was requesting additional documents directly from the board. She said it would take a few weeks, and she would update me when she had more information. I thanked her and hung up, then sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. If the state investigator found proof of backdating, that was fraud, and the board could face criminal charges. I called Laura and told her what Sandra had said. Laura said, "This is bigger than your driveway now." If they were backdating resolutions to justify fines, they were probably doing it to other people too, and that is a pattern of intentional misconduct. She said the state would likely refer it to the Attorney General's office if the evidence was strong enough, and the management company could lose its license. I said, "What happens to my case?" She said, "You win. The lien gets released, the fines get voided, and you probably get reimbursed for your costs." I said, "When?" She said, 6 months. Maybe a year. I said I can wait that long. But the board could not. On May 22nd, I got a frantic email from Diane. The board has called an emergency meeting for May 24 at 6:00 p.m. to discuss the state investigation and potential legal expenses. All homeowners are encouraged to attend. I forwarded it to Laura and said, "They are panicking." She said, "Good. Go to the meeting and listen. Do not volunteer anything, just watch them scramble." Saturday evening, I walked to the clubhouse. The parking lot was half full, more cars than I had seen at any HOA event in the 3 years I had lived here. Inside, the meeting room was packed, every chair filled and people standing along the walls. Laura was already there, sitting in the same back row seat as before. I sat next to her, and she leaned over and whispered, "This is going to be good." Heather, Donald, and Sharon were at the front table, and Heather looked tired. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her black parka was unzipped, showing a gray sweater underneath. She stood up and said, "Thank you all for coming on short notice. The board has been notified that the State Real Estate Commission is investigating certain complaints filed by a homeowner in this community. We want to assure you that the board has acted in full compliance with all governing documents and state laws, and we are cooperating fully with the investigation. However, the legal costs associated with responding to the investigation are significant, and the board is considering a special assessment to cover those costs." The room erupted. Someone shouted, "How much?" Another voice said, "You are not hitting us with fees because you screwed up." A man in the front row stood up and said, "I want to see the financials before you vote on anything." Heather held up her hand and said, "Please, everyone calm down." The assessment would be approximately $150 per household, one-time payment due by July 1st. Donald said, "This is necessary to protect the community from frivolous litigation." Sharon said nothing, just stared at her hands. Gene stood up from the middle row. He said, "I filed one of those complaints and it was not frivolous. You fined me twice for things I did not do wrong and you would not listen when I tried to appeal." Heather said, "Your case was handled appropriately, and the fines were valid." Gene said, "Then why did the state investigator call me last week and ask if you had ever sent me certified mail?" Heather's face went red. She said, "I do not know what you are talking about." Gene said, "Yes, you do. You never sent certified mail to anyone. You just taped notices to doors and called it done. That is not legal." Heather stood up fast enough that her chair tipped backward. She said, "This meeting is about the special assessment, not about individual complaints. If you have issues with your case, you can file an appeal like everyone else." Gene said, "I did file an appeal. You ignored it." Another voice from the back said, "Same here. I got fined for a trash can, and when I asked for a hearing you said the board did not have time." Heather said, "Those cases were resolved according to the rules." A woman in the third row said, "What rules? You make them up as you go." Donald tried to interrupt, but the room was too loud. People were shouting over each other, some demanding refunds, others asking why the legal fees were so high, a few saying they were going to file their own state complaints. Heather banged her hand on the table and said, "Enough. This meeting is adjourned." She grabbed her clipboard and laminated notice templates and walked toward the door. I stood up and said, "Wait." She stopped and turned around. I said, "You said you decide what the truth is around here. Do you remember that?" She said, "I do not have time for this." I said, "Because the state investigator has a recording of you saying it, and it is in my complaint as evidence of bad faith." She stared at me. I said, "You also said my evidence does not count because it is not in your winter format. That is in the recording too. And now the investigator has invoices showing the management company billed the HOA for work that was never approved by the homeowners." She said, "You do not know what you are talking about." I said, "Actually, I do. And so does the state." I opened my binder and pulled out a document I had been holding back, a spreadsheet I had built by comparing the management company's contract to the ledger entries. The contract listed a flat monthly fee of $1,200 for administrative services, plus itemized billing for legal and contractor services at pre-approved rates. The ledger showed the management company had billed $1,800 in December and $2,100 in January, $3,900 total over 2 months, but the contract cap was $1,400 per month unless the board voted to exceed it. There was no record of a vote. I had checked every meeting minute going back 6 months. The management company had been overbilling the HOA by at least $1,000 a month, and no one had noticed because the ledger only showed totals, not breakdowns. I walked to the front table and set the spreadsheet in front of Heather. I said, "This is a management company invoice trail showing bogus legal fees were added without authorization. The contract caps admin fees at $1,200 per month. You have been paying nearly double that, and the overage is being funneled into legal fees that do not exist." She looked at the spreadsheet, and her face went from red to white. Sharon leaned over and read it, then looked at Donald. Donald said, "Where did you get this?" I said, "The contract is public record, filed with your nonprofit registration. The ledger is on the member portal. I just put them side by side. He said, We need to review this with our attorney. I said, You mean the attorney who billed you $2,400 to fight my $400 fine? Go ahead, but I already sent this to the state investigator, and I am sending it to every homeowner in this room tonight. Heather said, You are making a very serious accusation. I said, I am stating facts. If the facts are wrong, show me the board vote that approved the overage. She said, We do not have to show you anything. I said, Actually, you do. The state investigator requested all financial records last week, and you have 21 days left to comply. If you do not, the commission can suspend the management company's license and refer the board for prosecution. She said, You are bluffing. I said, Call Sandra at the commission and ask her. Then I turned to the room and said, If anyone else here has been fined or threatened by this board, file a state complaint. The portal is online, it takes 10 minutes and you do not need a lawyer. The more complaints they get, the faster this stops. Jean stood up and said, I am filing tonight. The woman in the third row said, Me too. Another man said, I got fined for a deck stain color. I am filing. Heather said, This is slander. I said, It is not slander if it is true. She said, Get out. All of you. This meeting is over. She grabbed her clipboard and notices and walked out, Donald and Sharon trailing behind her. The room stayed full for another 20 minutes, people clustering in groups, exchanging phone numbers, talking about fines and notices and appeals. Laura and I stood by the door, and she handed out her business cards to anyone who asked. By the time we left, at least 8 people had said they were filing complaints. I walked home in the dark, streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement, and for the first time in 2 months I felt like I had won something real. Not the lawsuit, not the money, but the knowledge that I was not alone, and the board could not bury this anymore. 3 weeks later I got a call from Sandra. She said the investigation had uncovered significant procedural and financial violations, and the commission was issuing a formal reprimand against the management company and requiring the board to adopt corrective measures. She said the management company had been overbilling the HOA for 18 months, the board had failed to follow notice requirements in at least 14 cases, and the December emergency resolution had been backdated to justify fines that were imposed before the rule existed. She said the commission was ordering the HOA to void all fines issued under the backdated resolution, refund any payments collected, and release all liens. She said my case was included in that order, along with Jean's and 6 others. I asked what happened to Heather, and Sandra said the board members were not personally penalized, that the commission was requiring the HOA to hold new elections within 60 days and adopt a transparency policy for all financial decisions. I asked if the management company would lose its license, and she said they were placed on probation for 1 year, and any further violations would result in suspension. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called Laura. She said, You did it. I said, We did it. She said, Now settle the lawsuit and get your costs back. I said, How much should I ask for? She said, Filing fees, postage, repair costs, and your time. Probably $1,200 total. I said, They will never agree to that. She said they will, because if they do not, you go to trial and the judge sees the state order and awards you even more. I sent Brennan a settlement demand that night, drop all fines, release the lien, reimburse me $1,200 for costs and repairs, and issue a written statement that I complied with all CC&R requirements. In exchange, I would dismiss the lawsuit and drop the state complaint follow-up. He replied the next morning, agreed, except the reimbursement amount is $900. I countered with $1,100. He agreed. We signed the settlement agreement on May 30th, and the lien was released on June 2nd. The check arrived on June 10th, and I deposited it the same day. Gene called me a week later and said he got his refund too, $400, and he was buying me that beer I had mentioned to Mike. I said I would take him up on it. We met at a sports bar near the neighborhood, and he told me Rita had gotten her money back too, along with 3 other people from the meeting. He said the board had scheduled new elections for July, and at least 2 people were running against Heather. I said, Are you running? He said, Hell no. But I am voting. I said, Me too. The elections happened on a Tuesday night in mid-July. I voted for the two challengers, both younger homeowners who had been fined under the emergency resolution and wanted to clean up the board. They won by a landslide. Heather did not run for re-election. Donald and Sharon resigned the day after the vote. The new board held its first meeting in August, and the first item on the agenda was rescinding the December emergency resolution. It passed unanimously. I kept the binder on my bookshelf, tabs still labeled, documents still organized. I did not need it anymore, but I liked knowing it was there. Just in case. September brought cooler air and the first yellow leaves on the trees. I was raking my front yard when a car pulled up and a woman got out, middle-aged, wearing a business suit. She walked up my driveway and said, "Are you the homeowner who fought the HOA?" I said, "That is me." She said, "I am a reporter with the Omaha World-Herald. I am doing a story on HOA abuses in the metro area, and your name came up in the State Commission's public records. Would you be willing to talk?" I said, "Maybe." "What do you want to know?" She said, "Everything." The story ran 2 weeks later, front page of the Metro section, HOA overreach, how one homeowner fought back and won. It included quotes from me, Jean, Rita, and Sandra from the Real Estate Commission. It included copies of the laminated notices, the backdated resolution, and the invoice spreadsheet. It included a statement from the new board president saying the previous board had violated homeowner trust and the new leadership was committed to transparency. It did not include a comment from Heather, because she had refused to talk to the reporter. I ran into Heather once more, in October, at the grocery store. We were in the same checkout lane and she was 2 people ahead of me. She saw me and her face tightened. She did not say anything. She paid for her groceries and walked out. I paid for mine and went home. I never saw her at another HOA meeting, and I heard from Jean that she moved out of the neighborhood in November. I do not know where she went, and I do not care. The new board was not perfect, but it was better. They posted meeting minutes on time. They sent certified mail before issuing fines. They hired a new management company with a transparent fee structure. And when someone complained about a driveway crack or a mailbox color, the board actually listened before making a decision. It was not dramatic, it was just normal, the way it should have been from the start. I kept my car in the driveway all winter, and no one bothered me. I patched the crack one more time in the spring, and it held. The laminated notices disappeared from the mailboxes, and the neighborhood started to feel like a place I actually wanted to live. I still have the binder on my shelf, and sometimes I flip through it, just to remind myself that pushing back was worth it. Not because I won money or got revenge, but because I proved that the rules matter, and people who ignore them do not get to win forever. Laura and I stayed in touch. She called me in December to say the management company's probation had been extended after another complaint surfaced, this one from a different HOA in Bellevue. She said the pattern was clear now, and the commission was building a case for permanent license suspension. I said, "Good." She said, "You started something." I said, "I just wanted to fix my driveway." She said, "And you ended up fixing the whole system." I said, "Not the whole system, just my corner of it." She said, "That is how it always starts." I still work at the logistics office downtown, still hate chaos, still keep my mailroom running smooth. But now when I drive home through West Omaha and see the Millstone HOA sign at the neighborhood entrance, I do not feel the tightness in my chest anymore. I just feel tired and a little bit proud. The driveway is smooth. The car is parked where I want it. The HOA knows my name, and they know what happens when they push someone who knows how to push back. And if they ever try it again, I still have the binder.